So I'll introduce the panelists in a second, but we just start here and we'll go around.
Oh, hi, I'm Alex Busansky. I'm president of the National Council on Crime and Delinquency.
Gary Glick, former treasurer.
Dylan Lowy from Western Writers, working on a book for Moneyball for Government, so I'll be typing a lot while you're
Hi, Darren McKeever with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Chris Gibb, Government Accountability Office.
Bob Alpin, John Hopkins.
Judy Parker, Urban Alliance.
Sam Merrill, Citizen Schools.
Hi, I'm Maya Giacomo from the City of Philadelphia.
Patrick McCarthy with the Education Foundation.
I'm Mark Turkey with Results for America. Bethany Little with America Chiefs.
Adrienne Bordone with Social Solutions.
Bob Slavin from Johns Hopkins University and Success for Hope.
Mary Features, JDA Frontline. Emma Cox on the video. Kim Castle, Coalition for Evidence-Based Policy.
Daniel Stibb, the Hewlett Foundation.
David Morehouse with the Heritage Foundation.
Amanda Jellick, Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation.
Liebman, Olagoke, Ben Midland, University.
Nisha Patel, the Aspen Institute.
Sam Unger, the Center for American Progress.
Thank you all for joining us. I think our task today is to come up with concrete suggestions by the end of this hour for steps we could do to move forward the Pay for Success agenda, particularly in Washington, places where we need some federal help to let states do some of the things they're doing. I suspect in order to get to those concrete solutions, we need to talk a bit about why this tool is actually something worth spreading, what we're learning about that, and why there's a federal role here. And to talk about that topic, we have I guess we'll call it the Pay for Success All-Star team here with us. Batting first and playing shortstop on our team is Molly Baldwin, who is the CEO and founder of Roca, which is an organization in Massachusetts, in Chelsea, Massachusetts, that works with some of the most troubled juveniles in the state and helps them turn their lives around. It is the service provider in the Massachusetts Social Impact Bond, who we're going to batting second. And what position did I give you? Shortstop? Playing center field is Tracy Palandijan, who is the founder and CEO of Social Finance, which is one of the two full-purpose intermediaries in doing social impact bond projects and put together the New York State project, among others. Third. Batting third, and you can play, you can pitch on this team. Is Andy
National League?
Yeah, you're good. Is Andy Phillips, who I'm sorry, I didn't know your titles. Goldman Sachs is vice president of the Urban Investment Group at Goldman Sachs, and I guess you've done the New York City project and the Utah project and the Massachusetts project, right? In terms of social impact bond projects. And batting cleanup, we have John Big Poppy Greenblatt, who I would have be the designated hitter, but because we are in a national city, you're going to have to play first base today.
That's trouble.
And he is special assistant to the president and director of the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation. And we have a last-minute addition to our team. We're very pleased to have Mark Fisher all the way in. Where's Mark? There, all the way in from the UK. Who is the UK Director of Social Justice at the Department of Employment and Pensions, and who on this team will have to be the wicket keeper. So let's start off, and if you don't mind starting, Molly, I guess if you could talk a little bit about why it made sense for Roca to get involved in a Pay for Success initiative, and more broadly, what do you think service providers have to do to get ready to be part of these projects?
Thank you. Privileged to be here with you all in this group. So we work with very, very high-risk young men. Actually, none of them are juveniles. They are all 17 to 24, and they meet high-risk assessment scores. So they have a likelihood of continued violence and incarceration. And it's our great privilege to know them and work with them. Our project is about averting future incarceration. So they're all been involved in the system. They're all on track for future incarceration. And Jeff's team, the Harvard Civ Lab, did a really great job at a 10-year look back on data of this group, as well as we did a deep dive in Roca's data, and we also looked at marginal cost versus average cost of incarceration. So just for what it's worth, I think one of the strengths of the Massachusetts project is it's highly rigorous. It's who are we serving, how do we know this, where do these ideas come from, and the economic modeling is really great. So kind of maybe to talk about being ready, and then I'll talk about the advantage of it, particularly I think Roca had been fortunate to work with young people. About 7 years ago, we took a look at our highest risk young men. We were getting horrible results, and we brought the organization to a screeching halt and started using theory of change processes, performance-based management, internal research, and external research to really drive the outcomes to help this particular group of young men make changes. Not because we think so, not because we like it, and we did all that, and that was kind of fun. And I don't know that it was so helpful. And so through creating a very transparent system and using data and really looking at who we're serving, we began to see that we were really making some progress on moving the needle of helping these young men really change and do that. So what enabled us to be ready and to have the privilege to do this was that we've been working on performance-based management, data, theory of change, and had a lot of people in and out of what I call our underwear drawer all the time, and should be. Most importantly, because it is a privilege and a sacred activity to be in the middle of somebody's life who has suffered so much and already caused a fair amount of harm. And so if you're going to get in somebody's life and say, yes, you can make a change, and you could be happy, and you could put your guns down, and you could actually go to work, and you can succeed, is no little thing. And so the reason we did this was so that we were worthy of their company, and that we would figure out how each and every day, in spite of our mistakes and our very human, silly errors, and sometimes neglect, that we have the privilege to show up again the next day. And I think that's got to be at the core of all of these discussions. And that's what helped us be ready. What Pay for Success is enabling us to do is scale in a way that we could never have imagined. The Massachusetts project has $27 million in success payments from the state, an additional $11.67 million in success payments from the feds, and would allow us to serve 1,300 young men. And what's just remarkable, certainly not in my lifetime, have I seen or heard of that amount of resources for that risk level. Generally, some of our friends who aren't in such risk level, because it's a little easier to tolerate, and the risk of kind of hanging out with them is a lot easier. So that's probably the most powerful thing, is to be able to put resources together, to be able to do, we're going to do a random assignment, because we're never going to be able to serve enough young people. The random assignment's not being done by us, it's really being done on the state side of the house and the evaluation side of the house, so we don't have to refuse services. We pick somebody up who's in the control group, we turn the name in, they pull them out of the control group, so that it's sort of the least amount of harm. We believe that we have one of, certainly not the only, but one of the solutions for really high-risk young people. And in a country where we're realizing prison, excuse my language, sucks, it gets rotten outcomes, it costs a lot of money, and in fact causes more harm. It's a lot easier to talk about sort of people at a lower risk level. So what do you do with the group with gun charges and felony charges and assaults? And in fact, we know they can change more often than not. So it's an enormous privilege and an honor. So thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question,
Sure.
which is about somewhere in the middle of the putting together the Massachusetts project, everyone decided to apply for the federal DOL grant, which obviously allowed the project to be bigger, which was a good thing for all purposes. But did it have any other effect on the development of the project?
I think it gave it a huge amount of legitimacy. The project itself is fairly legitimate, but as you know, in the beginning, new things take a while. People have all kinds of excitement about it and criticism about it, even when it hasn't happened. I was joking with Tracy on the plane, on the number of phone calls we got before we signed the contract. How's it going? I'm like, what is it, right? Or people who call us, we're 2 months into it and go, well, some people don't like those things. I'm like, really? Let's try to let things, let's try to help some people and see what we can do. So I think it gave a lot of legitimacy. I think it's really important from a provider viewpoint that government, state governments, local governments, and federal governments truly move to outcomes, because I'm hard-pressed to see a lot of that, to be truthful. And so I think that the other huge advantage is this kind of disruption, and maybe we really should see if we're helping people change their lives. And I think that's enormous.
Tracy, the New York project also got a DOL grant, so I'm just curious from your perspective what role it plays in New York.
Well, first of all of us get to work with Jeff Liebman, which is both the Massachusetts and the New York State experience is very much a Jeff Liebman special. And I also want to make sure that everyone knows that Sam Schaefer is in the corner of the room. Sam is the CEO of CEO, which stands for the Center for Employment Opportunities, which is the provider in the New York State deal. And feel free to chime in, Sam, anytime. Unlike the Massachusetts experience, which that Governor Patrick was already committed to this financing, the federal DOL opportunity really catalyzed New York State's action. So as a result of the process up at the feds, New York State then issued a procurement to find an intermediary to test this, and you put it very nicely, this tool. Ultimately, Pay for Success remains a financing tool. And really created the opportunity to think about this in a rigorous way in the state of New York. I have to say that when the federal folks wrote the NOFA, people didn't know a lot of things that they didn't know, and we remain to be in that same position even 3 or 4 years into this experimentation. And so while the federal opportunity created and catalyzed a lot of state and local jurisdictions to really think deeply about the promise of this tool, it also created some challenges for some of these states. For example, one would need to put up a commitment of capital, and Andy, chime in too from Goldman's perspective, really think about the pricing of outcomes and establishing payment thresholds, even before we fully understood the risk and challenges to this project. So, that was definitely a challenge. However, we managed through the challenge. And actually, ironically, that timeline required all the parties to really stay focused. As Jeff introduced all of us, Pay for Success is very much a team sport. It's a multi-stakeholder partnership with lots of moving parts, and us as the intermediary sitting in the middle really appreciated that cadence that the federal government established so that we can keep the project moving. It's interesting to see, although both New York and Massachusetts took advantage of the federal opportunity, they're actually quite different projects. In fact, if you look at the 4 projects on the ground, actually, Andy Goldman is in 3 of those 4 projects. There's a saying, if you've seen one Pay for Success deal, you've only seen one Pay for Success deals. And the level of experimentation, both from the perspective of the evaluation methodology. For example, Molly mentioned that the Massachusetts uses a randomized controlled trial to determine investor payments. It's the same for New York State, but it's actually quite different in Utah and in New York City. The role of philanthropy is also quite different. The financial structure of these deals are quite different. So for example, Goldman is involved in the 3 deals, Utah, New York City, and Massachusetts. The financial institution participation for the New York State deal is actually structured quite differently, in the sense that Bank of America served as a placement agent for the deal, selling the security to the high net worth clients, but they actually had no financial stake, and they were not the investor. And I can go on and on about the different deals, but what is really important, and connecting this morning's conversation around evidence, is that all of these 4 examples is simply kind of a bridge to bring evidence-based programs to greater government adoption. And if Pay for Success and social impact bonds could be that bridge to accelerate more revenue and investor capital to ultimately government pays for these programs in the back end, but accelerate government's adoption, I think we would have achieved a great thing. And I just want to pick up on one little note, which is fresh across the other side of the pond, and very much speaks to Patrick's comment this morning about driving systems change. So the very first social impact bond being Peterborough, which is only in year 4 of an 8-year experiment, has served, is in the middle of serving the second cohort of a 3-cohort project. The Ministry of Justice has decided to actually not use social investment funds, not use the investors' capital to fund the 3rd and last cohort, but actually to use government funds to directly pay for the 3rd cohort. So I think, of course, a lot of nuanced discussions and layers to tease apart this decision. But broadly speaking, I think this is a tremendously exciting and positive development that Pay for Success has really catalyzed broader government adoption and thinking about how they fund projects more directly. So it's a means to an end, but it's really exciting to see.
When the Massachusetts and New York state projects got announced late December, early January, it was a big deal because the states had actually pulled off projects, but I thought it was an even bigger deal because both states, as part of announcing that these projects were finally operational and delivering services, said they wanted to do more of this. So somehow they decided, having lived through the difficulty of doing one of these, that it was actually allowing them to accomplish something that they couldn't accomplish through other means. And I guess I'd love to turn to Mark, where I think you have probably done 4 times as many deals as the rest of us combined, or something like that. And why do you think the UK government is, what is this enabling the UK government to do that it can't do through other means?
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. I should say it's a pleasure to be here. Explain why we're interested in social investment and social impact bonds. I'm a social justice director in the DWP in London. The DWP is the welfare department that pay basically benefits, pensions, get people back to work across Great Britain. My role in the welfare department is the prevention of dependency. How do you stop people getting onto welfare in the first place? That's basically my job in life. And how do you deal with the most long-term, most entrenched forms of dependency? We published a social justice strategy a year or so back. One of the key tools to achieve that objective of prevention is social investment, because it enables you to bring investment upstream, to deal with problems before they arise, to try and facilitate early intervention, and basically try ultimately to reduce the welfare bill and dependency. Clearly, SIBs are a big tool in that. We have a number of different SIBs running in Great Britain, not just Peterborough. It's important to mention in respect of Peterborough, this is the fact that the government has done what's just been described is a symptom of success. Basically, the principles that Peterborough are being rolled out right across the whole of the offending system, actually. So that's success. We run a number of other SIBs to do with increasing adoption rates. If you increase adoption rates for children, you will reduce taxpayer burden later on. If you increase fostering of children, stop getting into foster care, again, you will reduce burdens later on. If you reduce homelessness, we have SIBs running on all these different aspects. I personally, for our SIBs, run 10 social impact bonds. Our SIBs are designed, basically, we work in schools with kids who are falling out of school and becoming detached. And I pay by results, which is our term we use, to get kids re-engaged in school or in education, some other form of education, or training, or ultimately in employment. And I pay by results. And we created a year or so back a £30 million results fund, basically to pay these results. We now have 10 social impact bonds across the country. The key thing we did, I think, is we produced a rate card, which I've got some copies of here, which is essentially the return, essentially what the UK taxpayer is willing to put at risk for getting a particular form of results. You know, we've calculated that if you re-engage a kid, improve their school attendance, it will ultimately save you £700 in welfare spending. We put those prices to the market. We ended up with 10 social impact bonds, with people willing to come in under those prices for those results, which is, I think, a relatively simple way of constructing a set of SIBs. In fact, only yesterday we had published some more results on our programmes, and also the government's announced an expansion to more places, and also, so not just more of the sort of SIBs we've designed for what we describe as needs kids, not in education, employment or training. We also have to leave homeless young people as well. So two more programmes on SIBs. To us, this is not only about innovation, because we don't know enough about how to prevent long-term worklessness, but it's about a simple way to fund prevention, a simple way to fund sort of investment at the right people, right time in people's life cycles, and potentially it's a route towards the ultimate objective of reducing welfare dependency. But we are really, we think they're really, really interesting. We don't think they're the answer to every problem, just to be clear, but we think potentially they are, particularly if you want to foster innovation and do a sort of supercharge to a part of the system which you think needs more investment. They're a potentially powerful way to go. Obviously, we're going to do some rigorous evaluation, which we're very happy to share with anyone who's interested. And if anyone wants to come over and see our programs, we'd be delighted. And if anyone wants any more detail, I've got some stuff here.
Why is Goldman Sachs investments?
I had $1 for every time somebody asked me. I wouldn't have to work at Goldman. First, I will say that I've had the pleasure of speaking with Mark about the work they do in the UK, and I carry your rate card around and show it to people because I think it's really the front end of some of the innovation in this space. So you guys are doing amazing things. So why is Goldman Sachs investing in social impact bonds, which, as we all know, are not bonds? Because if they really were bonds, it would be more likely we'd be investing in them. I sit in a team at Goldman, and many of you have heard me describe this, but for those of you who don't know about our group, we're basically a team of folks that sit in Goldman Sachs Bank. We do not sit in the foundation. We sit in the bank on the business side. And we invest both the firm's capital and now have raised a fund that incorporates our clients' capital in projects that have a double bottom line return, so a financial return and an intentional social impact. That business has been around for about a dozen years. We've invested $3 billion+. And we continue to do that work. We do about $500 million a year of both debt and equity investments. The lion's share of that work really focuses on sort of the revitalization of low and moderate income communities, so financing charter schools, community health centers, affordable housing, mixed income housing. What's, I think, unique about our group and sort of led us down the path to social impact bonds, as well as a bit of a happy coincidence, is that our approach tends not to be focused on products. So we don't have a debt team and an equity team. We're really project focused. So someone comes to us and says, there's this great opportunity to buy this piece of land and build a new facility for our charter school so we can expand. And we sit down with them and we figure out, is it a new markets tax credit equity investment? Is it some debt? What is it going to take to get the project done? And so when Linda Gibbs, Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, who is here somewhere but not in this room, who is just an amazing force for innovation in city government, she called me and said, we're looking at this financing structure, social impact bonds. What do you think? Do you want to talk about it? And given who we are as a group, what we think about first is impact. And she started rattling off the statistics about kids on Rikers who are juveniles, sadly. And the recidivism rates over time are just horrifying. We very quickly said, yeah, we should talk about whether or not we can do this. And so we really approached it as sort of a natural extension of the work we do. We finance the built environment. This is a way we finance job creation projects. This is a way to use our capital to get important preventive social services into communities. The way we think about these investments is really as sort of a debt product where we're really making a loan to the intermediary who then uses those funds to sort of fund the upfront services and then sharing in the payment flows from the Pay for Success contract. When I think about it and strip it away, it really is at its core about two different things when I think about this overall movement. It is about government changing the way they do business and saying we're going to pay based on outcome, not based on what you've spent. And I think that's a pretty powerful tool. I'm looking at Gary Glickman because he and I both spent way too much time in our life doing employment programs for very challenged, disadvantaged workers. And most of those contracts moved a long time ago to paying based on outcomes, which meant you didn't see a dime as an organization until somebody got a job and then kept that job for 3 months and then 6 months. So the happy coincidence part of the story is that Linda Gibbs called me and I said, oh, sure, I know about pay for outcome contracts. I spent 10 years doing that. And the truth is I just wasn't ever smart enough to call Goldman Sachs and say, will you give me a loan and protect me from the downside risk of it? Happily, that all ended well, so that's a good thing. But that's sort of that's our perspective on it, and I think I would say that one of the things that I think is powerful about social impact bonds is that by definition you're forcing people to come to the table at the outset and say, what is our goal here? How will we, what do we consider a baseline success? What do we think of as outsized performance, and what do we think the downside is? How are we going to measure those things? And we all have to agree on that before a deal gets done. And I think everybody up here will attest that that is a grueling and hard process, but really very useful. And I think when we think about results, evidence-based policy, oftentimes that discussion isn't happening in as robust as a way. And I think bringing the parties to the table, and I think in some ways part of what the private sector does do is pushes some of that in a way.
Jonathan, the Obama administration has been a lot of different things to encourage evidence and patient success. And the Department of Labor grants we've already talked about, and giving lots of agencies flexibility to use funds on this. But I wonder if you could talk us through some particular proposal, which is the Treasury Incentive Fund, because I'm guessing that if we do our job in terms of next steps with this group, that's going to be something we're going to want to talk about in some detail, so if you could describe that for us.
Sure. So first of all, I would just thank, for all you don't know, Jeff has been like just a force of nature, helping to guide and sort of shape and steer this field, so we're all benefit for your public service in that sense. And everybody on here, all of you are like such pioneers in the field. It's cool to be up here with you. I also would highlight a couple people in the room who've been very involved in this work. Gary, who's already mentioned from Treasury, sort of Art and Friday there in the agency driving things. Dave Wilkinson, who just came in, is a former CDFI executive who's on my team who do this work, and Somal Shah, who just came in, was the first rep of the office, and helped to envision some of this. So I guess I'll talk about the fund as actually one of three efforts that we've undertaken to try to grow the peer success field and to contextualize it, which builds a bit on what Mark was talking about and my other colleagues. I mean, this is really fundamental to our social innovation agenda, which you could think of as a what works agenda. And so our what works agenda really has three parts to it. First, it's about identifying what works. This is about evidence-based policy, about open data programs, about standardizing how we measure impact. But it's all about trying to really get precise and rigorous about identifying what works. Then it's about scaling what works. This is about cross-sector collaboration, public-private partnerships, and simply acknowledging what the President has said many times, that this is an all-hands-on-deck moment, and we at the federal government can't, from on high, top-down, dictate how we get to the right outcomes. We need to acknowledge the limits of what we can do, and so bottom-up work with communities. And then thirdly, once you've started to identify and scale, then it's about sustaining what works. And that's really about implementing these market-based models. That's really looking to try to get the flywheel spinning in ways that as government pulls back, markets can help make these things work come along. And so impact investing and sort of a strategy is really fundamental to this sort of approach. So we can better optimize scarce public dollars and try to attract incremental private dollars. Because we just know that the nonprofit sector on its own doesn't have the resources, but we also know that government grants can't do it alone. We've got to find ways to get new money in the mix, take money off the sidelines and help direct it and invest in the communities. So the Pay for Success Fund is, I think, hopefully, if we see this thing materialize, we need all of your help to do that. I can't tell you a lot, so I didn't just say that. But the fund will really be a centerpiece of this architecture. So the idea is a $300 million fund. It was proposed in our FY14 and again this year in our FY15 budget. It sits at the Treasury Department. And I think that's really important. So being at Treasury is actually adjacent to the community finance, like the CDFI fund, the community finance infrastructure. These are the folks at Treasury with the technical expertise who know how to get deploy capital through nonprofits and communities. The fund is designed to sort of stimulate and support the market and to strengthen intermediaries. Intermediaries like social finance, intermediaries like third sector partners, intermediaries who are the ones helping to put together these deals. And this is really important because, I have all the confidence in the world in Andy and the team at Goldman Sachs. But I think we really are creating this fund to support the nonprofit intermediaries not to provide more money to Wall Street. Good luck, you guys.
To be clear, we're not looking for that.
There you go.
So we're all in agreement.
So the way that we see this happening is by offering credit enhancements to support these nascent care success deals at the state and local level, to be some of that first line to allow these deals to take shape. And then secondly, to support outcome payments, where again, state and localities need support to drive the right outcomes. We anticipate that this will be governed by an interagency working group. So there are multiple stakeholders inside the federal government as part of the internal governance process. And again, it will ultimately be managed and directed by the Secretary of the Treasury. I think what I would say also is that ultimately we hope that, again, much like the CDFI fund is really the cornerstone of our community finance infrastructure, I think it's our hope that this fund will be the cornerstone of an outcome financing infrastructure. So what else would that look like? What else are we doing? Well, on the one hand, as already mentioned, we're doing grants to help stimulate peer success models in areas like recidivism reduction that Molly and Roca do so much fantastic work on. Or on the workforce development side, that was mentioned. Congrats to Tracy for the New York deal, Bank of America deal that led to some of this. And we'll see more of these. We have $80 million or so in the budget for these kinds of pilots at FY15. We also see a need for training and technical assistance. So we have this cornerstone fund, we've got pilots to stimulate the market, and then we've got training and TA to help build the capacity. So the FY14 omnibus bill that was approved by Congress just a couple months ago, you've got up to $14 million allocated in the Social Innovation Fund for pay for success training and technical assistance. Now, this was overlooked by a lot of folks, so I'm highlighting it here. Again, the appropriators laid out specifically up to 20% of the $70 million fund is going to be allocated to pay for success capacity building work. So we know this is maybe most important. Literally a couple of hours ago, I sat in my office and was visited by the chairman of the LA County Board of Supervisors and his staff. You know, and the week before that, it was people from Iowa. And we get calls and we have meetings nearly every day, certainly multiple times a week, from state officials, from foundation executives, from local and county officials, from nonprofit CEOs, from folks in the private sector who want to understand how do we make pay for success work. And again, just to close, what we're really enthusiastic about is the way that new actors are starting to use the model. So yesterday, the First Lady celebrated the 4th anniversary of the Joining Forces Initiative. This is now to support the needs of returning veterans and military families. And God bless her and her team with help from folks on the outside, created something called the Joining Forces Impact Pledge, which is they more or less have pulled together over $100 million new dollars from philanthropy, from corporate and private philanthropy, to fund programs to support this community. Well, that's great, super. Maybe the most interesting thing was Bank of America's announcement that they believe there's a $50 to $75 million market right now for pay for success programs to support this cohort. And they've commissioned social finance to work with them to do a feasibility study to hammer this out. So why do I bring this up? Because whereas we are directly, again, creating the fund, using pilots, doing training and TA, we're now starting to see organically things pop up in areas we hadn't even thought about before, which makes us believe that this field of impact investing and sort of outcome financing is really going to take off.
Okay, so when you're running around to all the different places you're running around to get new deals started, are you running into projects that aren't going to be viable without federal help?
Yeah, it's a great question. For example, the work that we're working with Andy's team in South Carolina is focused on helping low-income first-time mothers get the help they need so that they can see through to a healthy pregnancy and then using home visitation programs until the child's second birthday. A lot of the savings are accumulated, and Jeff, you know this well, at Medicaid level, and the FMAP in South Carolina is 70% is actually the federal portion of the savings, and if you move to Massachusetts, I think the lowest is 50%. So the math of these deals could get quite challenging without the federal willingness to participate in sharing the savings with the state. In fact, I was thinking about this on the plane coming down here, Jeff. We've always been thinking about how can the state, like in Mississippi, like in South Carolina, access that federal stream of savings. What if we were to flip it around and say, you know what, I'm the federal government, I save 70 cents on the dollar, why shouldn't the federal government commission a Pay for Success fund around Medicaid savings and then try to get the 30 cents from certain states, right? And flip it around because they are enjoying the majority of the savings. So a place where you can see the federal government benefiting a lot from a financial perspective is a very right place for the federal government to participate in Pay for Success. And then the other area is when you have a target population like that of veterans that Jonathan just mentioned, where basically, if the Department of Defense or VA were to be the commissioner and the counterparty for these transactions, all the savings actually accrue to that agency. And ultimately, investors want simplicity in the structure, and sometimes multi-payer structures can be more complicated. So we're just really excited about the prospect of a potential transaction with DoD or VA as a payor. As Jonathan mentioned, some of the statistics are staggering. I think like 21 million veterans today, and with the anticipated proposed return of the Iraq and Afghanistan troops coming home, that's an additional 2.5 million folks coming into the system. I think the highest ever in terms of needs since the end of the Second World War. So we're really going to see a lot of strain on these organizations providing, the help that we need from employment, homelessness, and physical and psychological chronic obstacles. So we're really excited about the prospect, but a lot of work needs to be done. But the Medicaid one is very real, and if there's a way to do it.
So, Tracy, I heard you say one place where we need federal help is where there's shared savings, and basically the total government benefits exceed the costs, but the state benefits alone don't exceed the costs. And the second area is where actually it's a federal priority. It may be just a policy priority, or maybe the federal government is going to get all the savings, and Veterans Project is one. I've always thought that helping folks with health impairments get back on their feet rather than relying on SSI and disability insurance could be a place where, unless the federal government starts it, it's not going to happen, because it's a fully a federal cost. The states don't have really incentive to do that on their own. There's a third, I think, rationale for federal involvement, but I think it's a harder one to sell, which is that suppose we have a bunch of projects that each have a 1 in 4 chance of succeeding, but if they succeed, we can take them nationwide. That's really valuable experimentation. We should, if we had 8 ideas that would really improve our schools or something like that, we should try them all. But on their own, none of them are financially viable, and they can't happen. And so you could imagine the federal government playing a role in making those kind of projects feasible by either doing a credit enhancement or making there be a prize associated with discovering the solution. But I don't know how to sell that. I can explain why we need this treasury fund because of these first 2 rationales, but I'm not sure I have a way to communicate that and convince people.
Well, it's interesting. I think the way we kind of think about it is there certainly is a clear and long-standing case for the government to support R&D in the material sciences, where there's no obvious commercial rationale, but where we may see something. So we will do that. We will explore, we will tinker, we'll experiment in ways the private sector never would. And then when something is deemed to be commercially viable, when we've got what we need, and we'll kick it over to the private sector to take that out to the markets. I think the reverse is true here in the social sciences, where I don't think and I think the political process really wouldn't tolerate us sort of running experiments with taxpayer money on midnight basketball, which is kind of an often criticized, well, it once was an often criticized program that actually delivered results, but it didn't have the strong outcome base. So I think what our role can be here is to stimulate the philanthropy, the private sector, if you will, to do the R&D, to test, to see what works, and then when we need that something is successful, and there's a strong evidence base that demonstrates that they can be effective, we can then step in and help take it to scale with taxpayers.
So you're saying in particular we shouldn't be using SIBs for the things that are in the more R&D phase?
I would agree with that. I think these are a really great tool for when you're confident that something works. And I think Molly's program is a great example. CEO is a great example where there's data. And I think where philanthropy plays a really catalytic role is seeding those they're the friends and family, right? If you use the private sector example, But I think where the federal government can be helpful is around the TA and capacity building. Because if folks are thinking about when they do those early stage pilots, right? If you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking about you're developing your product, you're always thinking long-term on a business plan as to how are you going to create sustainability. And wouldn't it be great if the early stage funding had in mind how are we going to send this off to market so that it can be a pay for success? And our experience in Utah really highlights that. It's a pretty unique early education model that is pretty amazing when you see it. One of the things they did early on is they put in place a system for tracking the very simple outcomes that have then become our payment metrics. So they've been pre-testing these kids for 6 years now, and then tracking them through school. And that laid the groundwork for me to be able to say, oh, can I model cash flows? Can I look at variability and feel good about making a loan against those future payments? And I think that's some of, and you know, to what Molly was saying about what made her ready, the amount of data they have on their program and how they track what they do. I was able to sit at an investment committee and say, you know, stellar management team, unbelievable performance, you know, management system in place. And I think those are the kinds of things in the early stages, if we can try and bake into the experiment phase, we'll then put folks on a path to, if it does work, we can then think about how to sustainably scale it.
I think I want to open up the discussion to everyone in the room here, but we really haven't given an assignment that apparently there's some report out thing that we got to do in 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and it has to involve concrete steps for how we're going to move forward, particularly I would say the federal agenda on pay for success. So as much as all of us like it, as long as all you can listen, as long as all of us, I know all of us like to sit around and just talk about everything about SIDS, but I want us to be a little bit disciplined and actually focus on this question and not just ask your random question that's always been bothering you about this model. And so, I don't know, other people have, are there other federal, let me start with, are there other federal ways the federal government can play an important role here that we haven't talked about?
I have a
Hi. I'm from Philadelphia, and we're exploring the possibility of doing a SID, and one of the things that we realize is that the learning curve of just understanding what the model is and then how to implement it is a big one. We've relied heavily on some nonprofits who've been really giving us all the information about how do these programs work, what's an intermediary, how do you know if you have an evidence based program. And so I think there's a shared learning component among cities, probably true among service providers and perhaps the intermediaries, where there's a lot of shared learning that happens across those different groups, but also among the groups, cities, counties, states, etc. that I think could benefit. I, happen to call a couple of different jurisdictions, and you also, and everybody's been so forthcoming with information that that's been a way for me to learn, and for our city government to learn about social impact bonds. But for everyone's willingness to talk to us, we would still kind of be twiddling our thumbs wondering, what is this bond that is a bond?
It's a good point. We've been to 2 White House convenings over the last 2.5 years, and I can tell you that 3 of the 10 projects we're doing came only because of, people met at those meetings and caused the projects to happen. So that community role is really important.
An idea to explore is, these performance bonds, right? Instead of you marrying them to the treasury fund or some other kind of SID type thing would be interesting.
I would just say, to me, these things can be really quite complicated, and just reusing existing components is quite important. If you've got one that's working somewhere, just steal it and try from somewhere else rather than try and sort of spend it.
Sadly, our system of government is more messy.
I don't actually believe that.
Maybe we're messy in our own way.
Yeah, we're in government messy in its own way.
So I was struck by what you said about the level of evidence and data that's necessary in order for the investment to happen. And the federal government invests in not merely what it should, but it does invest some in the research and evaluation programs. It feels like a thoughtful effort to identify what are the ones that you think could be right for this kind of thing, and focus the research and evaluation dollars that are very flexible for agencies. You can easily move around on getting that evidence and data so that we can take that next step. Because that's hard money to find, hard money to raise, and if the federal government has that flexibility to move its dollars for them.
It's a good idea.
A question, I think it's back on the training and technical assistance point, and that is that, you know, at their root, these are basically complex acquisitions from the government standpoint, right? I mean, it's just like buying any other complex product, and kind of the history of public-private partnerships tells you that you have more Chicago parking meters than you do other success. So what I guess one of the points, or at least speaking from what we hear on the Congress, one of the concerns that they have in the Congress on this is, how do we know the government's not going to get its lunch taken away from it, especially as we roll out and it's no longer just the people that are doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And if we're really successful, it won't be the dual bottom lines. Right. You know, eventually we'll just get to a single bottom line. Yeah. In that case, then you got, you know, Coast Guard deep waters and all that sort of stuff staring you in the face. So how do we manage that?
Well, one thing I will say is I do think, you know, like a year ago I was speaking at something and someone said to me a year and a half ago, I'm really concerned about the social impact bond bubble. I said, what are you talking about? We had one of these deals. Would
that we were there, right?
Right. But on the other hand, you know, a year and a half later with these 10 deals, with, you know, and lots more in the pipeline, I do think one of the risks that we run is think of this as a panacea to solve all our ills. And I've never heard the expression, you've seen one social impact bond, you've seen one social impact bond. But the idiosyncrasies and the complexity of each deal is one of the real challenges we have with scale. So the first thing I would say is that someone is going to take away our lunch money. Like, there are going to be failures, and we need to prepare for that. We need just to acknowledge the fact that this is a learning process, and it's going to take us time to get it right.
Well, how can I just
Sure.
on the failure? I mean, I'm less interested on the particular intervention failing because, you know, we didn't have good evaluation data, and more on government not having the sophistication to frankly sit across from Goldman and know how to write the contract. Because I'm worried about a lot of these little local governments that are going to view this as the panacea to say, geez, we can't fund all these prevention programs that Jeff talks about, and all of a sudden we're going to be able to do it for free.
So the thing I was going to say that I do think is really important, which is why I'm glad that Patrick's in the room for the Andy Casey Foundation, and, you know, that Daniel's in the room for the Hewlett Foundation, because I will tell you that we really need the templates and the scholarship built up around this to build the capacity of the state, county, and local authorities. We need model agreements. We need best practices on evaluation. We need evidence frameworks that will reduce the transaction costs, if you will, and make it easier for those local officials not to have Andy kind of eat their lunch on the street.
This is the second time I've been to town. We called it evil banker.
Whoa. I don't think I said that.
I know, but somebody else did. So I'm painting you that. And for the record, I spent 20 years on the other side.
No.
I can give you references.
No.
Someone's feeling a little insecure.
So you know the other side's weaknesses, so you can really take that much.
So one of the things I would say about that is, ideally when the market develops, right now when we're doing these deals, they're so idiosyncratic that really everybody has to come to the table to make it work. Ideally when there is a market, what you end up with is folks working in government, and in some ways this is very much how the Rikers deal with structured is, they had really come up with their version of a rate sheet before we ever came to the table. And they really came to us and said, will you finance that? And I think that ideally the market gets more sophisticated. Now that still means that smaller cities are going to have a really hard time figuring out how to contract based on outcomes. I think that that's just true. But I think ideally what happens is there are models, and it's not everybody at the table. You really then are going, and hope, you know, ideally, it's such a robust market that you come to me and you find out what I'll price it at, and then you go down the street and you ask some other evil banker how they would price it. And then there's that back and forth.
Because what happens, and I'll just give you the one-line quote that I've heard, and this isn't representative, but it's people who's on the Hill whose heart is in the right place, but they will say, my guys can't run a toll road, and you expect them to contract for reductions in teenage pregnancy? and they're going to get killed on
I
that
think
stuff.
a key role of the Treasury Fund
Mhm.
in deciding which state deals to do projects. That will be a place where there's expertise, and if a state comes in,
And that's
with
the key.
and
Yeah.
they'll say that benefit cost analysis wasn't any good. We're not doing that one.
I think that's
So if you want the takeaway from upstairs, that's one, is making
That's
sure.
that's tough, especially here
That's
with
right.
that this is a problem we got to
Yeah.
solve in terms of the perception on the Hill. The other thing I would say is, if the government overpays by 10% on one of these projects, that's not a big problem if in the end of the day they know whether or not to continue this program or stop it. The big error is starting a new government program, running it forever, and never knowing whether it works.
Yeah.
And if you overpay for 10% for 4 or 5 years and then you find out it doesn't work and you shut it down, that's so good compared to how we're doing it right now.
One of the things I think that's really key, and I think this is a great challenge, is that governments have to have the right data. And I think that's probably one of the bigger problems we're facing all across the country. That's why we don't have outcomes-based programming to begin with, because people's data is nutty, just to be honest. I mean, or their bean counting or whatever, you know, the same, like in the criminal justice system in Massachusetts, bless them, I mean, you know, I've lost track of how many different risk assessment forms or data systems there are. So that's a real critical issue, so how that could get improved.
Can I just say one?
Hold on a second. I've been told we have 3 minutes. Let's just collect
Are you looking
comments
for
quickly.
government recommendations, or are you looking for other type of recommendations here, just as a start?
Right now?
Yeah.
I think our recommendation is what can we do to move this forward, particularly the conversation in Washington, so that the federal government can be more helpful.
So two things. One, I think while the funding of the Treasury Technical Assistance Fund is valuable for intermediaries, it's also pretty valuable if states can get technical assistance themselves and just build their own capacity locally. So if there's some way to provide, maybe it's an adjunct to the Treasury Fund, or maybe it's through HUD and other technical assistance programs, that money actually be used to provide technical assistance to cities and states to actually do that, that would be valuable. The second is, you know, it's actually more foundation oriented, but to think about creating a learning hub on impact bonds, because there's a lot of information, but there's a lot of information, a lot of pockets to the colleague from Philadelphia. But is there a place where you can see an analysis of 5, 6, 7 different bonds that people can look at and say, this is what they did in health, but this was the nuance that came out of it. It's somebody that's doing the analysis for it, because we all get calls and we're all just referring everyone to each other. But if there was one place where somebody could go to, or a few places that were there was an analytical approach or something. So
I sure would love to see, like, the Gates Foundation, which is doing so much good work on impact metrics, to understand how we think about metrics, so we get away from what you described, along with friends like at Hewlett and Amy Casey, to think about how they can work together to create, you know, we have papersuccess.org already, but I think the next generation is what someone described with templates, deal analysis, to make it brain dead simple to learn how to get into this field.
Jeff, we have to wrap up.
All right.
We're over capacity in the room, and they're concerned about us having almost 15 more people in here than we should be. So we need to wrap up. I apologize.
I mean, thank you all for panelists.
Thank you.
Fire.